Hello, everyone. Another day, another episode of our BWX Symposium. Here today, we are with Gabriel, as usual, and our brilliant panelists, Michaela and Anna. Please share a bit and share with us a bit uh, about you.
So my name is Michaela. I am a master in applied linguistics. I work currently with AI, so I've been working with artificial intelligence aimed at translation. And before I did that, I also worked with lexicographical translation, translating dictionaries. And Anna actually worked with me, so we have a lot to say about that. Our dictionaries, they were domain based, so we were involved in the translation of three dictionaries. The first one was about soccer, the second one was about the Olympics, and the third one was about the Paralympic sports. So we have
It's
experience working with specialized terminology in English and Portuguese.
So
nice.
my name is Luisa. Hello. Hello, everyone. I am a translator, a linguist researcher, and a PhD student in applied linguistics. My research focus on terminology, and in my master, I used to work with the translation of sensitive texts. And I also work with Mika in a research group with the lexicological translations.
Wow. I'm blown away. Rodrigo, thank you so much for bringing Ana Luisa, Micaela. I'm humbled. Super nice to be with both of you. Hopefully, we'll make it very fun and exciting. The goal, today, the topic is how to translate a website with AI. But I don't know how to do it. Otherwise, I end up getting caught up in abstract stuff. So, yeah, for those who like it, it's going to be fun. For those who don't, I'm so sorry. But and Rodrigo, thank you so much for introducing me so nicely. Me again. Yeah, I know that I'm always the same person here in these events, but I try to keep them interesting. But I know that I do love the recurring aspect of it. It's very nice to have Rodrigo too. Rodrigo, can you please introduce yourself, because you're a very important part of our show.
Oh, yes, I forgot. I'm Rodrigo. I'm head of marketing here at BitterWorks, and I'm the one who invited everyone here. I hope you guys enjoy our session today.
Cool. Very nice. So I'm going to contextualize our conversation, Ana Luisa, Micaela, um, around what we have in BWX. And again, I'm going to try to explain certain concepts. Some of them may become super clear, some of them not. But the goal point is a very fluid conversation. So I really welcome and encourage you to interrupt me as much as often. It's not even the right word. It's like adding to the conversation. So let me share my
All right.
screen. Perfect.
I think we have a lot of questions about that.
Yeah.
Great. That's always good. Let me just look for my right tab here. What's going on? For some reason, I'm not finding the right tab. I'll just share my entire screen. There we go. Perfect. Now you should probably see my entire screen.
Yes.
Okay, so this is BWX, and we'll jump right into it. I'm not going to talk about like the whole framework. We're going to focus exactly on the AI part. That's the juicy part. So I have here a translation project that I created of our homepage. So that's the website. It's our homepage. And I created this project into a few different languages: German, Latin American Spanish, Canadian French, Italian, Japanese, Portuguese, Swedish, Chinese. And we can explore different examples if you'd like in different languages. We can create similar projects with other languages too, not a problem at all. But let's start with our native tongue, Portuguese. By the way, all of us are native Portuguese speakers. If you couldn't tell by my accent, we're all native Portuguese Brazilian speakers. And so we'll focus examples on our home language. So first thing, we're presupposing for this webinar that somehow you already got your content exported from your website, right? And just briefly before I go into the AI, just so that I don't completely gloss over it, different people use different tools. Some companies operate with content management systems that have translation frameworks like Drupal or like Adobe Experience Manager as an example in the more enterprise side. WordPress has certain plugins that you can export your content in XLIF format and translate, re-import back in. There are JavaScript plugins. So there are all kinds of different ways to get your content out of the website and then back in. That's fundamental to website translation. But we're going to be focusing today on the AI aspect of things. So first, when I click on any given segment, I want to just give a lay of the land of what's happening here. And let me pick one that has a glossary term so that we are all familiar with the colors. I have a 4-year-old son and he loves colors and patterns. So I like talking about colors and patterns. So whenever we see anything green, we're talking about translation memory. And even the fuzzy matches, they're all going to come up in green. Right now we have a single MT feed enabled, this in blue. So MT is always going to show up in blue. And glossary terms are always going to show up in yellow, right? And so that's color coding, so everybody knows what we're talking about. Now, now talking a little bit about the mechanisms that are going on behind this, and everything that we'll see, we're going to basically be exploring this part of BWX, that's our AI-powered actions. So we're going to cover translations, suggestions, proofreading, and what we call smells, that's semantic verification. But we'll take it one by one, right? So typically, right, and Michaela and Anna, correct me if I'm wrong, right? But typically a translation workflow either has, let's say, presupposing that someone is working with a CAT tool, we have a translation memory, and more sophisticated workflows are going to have MT and even trained MT or tuned MT when the translation memory match is not available, right? That's typically, does that match more or less how you see translation setup?
Yeah.
Along with the glossary, obviously.
Yeah. Of course.
Mm-hmm. And then what happens is translators are left to resolve the discrepancies, right? So let me show a good example here. So like, let's say in this case, let's say, for instance, the glossary says one thing, but the TM feed says another thing. They have to think about, okay, what makes sense here? Am I going to follow the glossary? Am I going to follow the TM? I have to make decisions. Let me see if I can pick up a segment that has a fuzzy match here. And before I do it, let me make sure that I have the translation settings in this project set up so that in translation memory, so that we have the lower threshold. Perfect. So I just did that. Let me update it here. Perfect. Now let me see if now we should be getting in some points a fuzzy match. I want to see if I can show you. Okay, I'm not saying a fuzzy match, but the concept still works. So let's say here, for instance, we have a machine translation, right? And it's saying, time to meet with our generative language engine. The machine translation is saying, hora de conhecer nosso motor de linguagem gerativa. Okay, not so happy with that translation. But typically, right, and let's apply this translation. Typically, the translator would be, they would, how would you like to fix this? Let's start by that. How would you like to fix this?
Mika, any suggestions?
That's an interesting question. Hora de conhecer o nosso motor de linguagem gerativa.
Maybe the motor word is not so... With the Brazilian Portuguese, it's kind of weird because it's not the same.
I agree. I mean, I look at the sentence. It sounds weird. I don't know exactly how to fix it, but there's no right or wrong. Just give me something
Yeah.
that you feel that sounds more natural.
Maybe change the hora por venha. Venha conhecer.
Okay. So
It's
typically,
a possibility.
Venha conhecer. Okay, I like that. What else?
I'm thinking about perhaps modelo de linguagem gerativa, but
Okay.
it could be biased because
Better.
I work a lot with
No,
modelo.
but that's fine. There's no right or wrong. Let's modelo.
Okay, yeah.
It's just an exploration into language. It's not about
Yeah.
getting the translation right.
Trying to sound more.
Yeah, in my demos, I give the worst possible translations ever. So it's all
Yeah.
good.
It's good to see if it's working or not.
But okay, and do you like gerativa or generativa? I don't even know in Portuguese what's the right way to say generative.
We are using generativa
Okay, so let's change this.
more than gerativa.
Okay, so let's, for instance, typically, right, that would be the workflow. You have a glossary feed, which you may or may not agree with. You have an MT feed. Maybe this could have been fuzzy match. Same concept, right? You're fixing things at the segment level. You're confirming something. You override the glossary mismatch. Now, if I go back to the segment, now it's in green. It's a context match, and I have exactly the information of what we did. We just entered this information. So that's typically the process, right? And it can be quite time-consuming and laborious, right? Now, let's remove this translation over here. Now, what we're talking about is let's teach the glossary certain things. So let's teach the glossary that we want to say that engine is modelo, because that's what we just decided on. Let's also teach the glossary that generative is generativa. Notice that it's picking up. Go ahead.
Sorry, this glossary is just for this project or for all projects that you have in the tool?
Depends on how you set it up. You can decide. In this case, it's this glossary pertains to what we call an organizational unit, which is a cluster of knowledge. So other projects can share and benefit from that, but it's you could create a specific learning glossary just for this project.
Awesome.
So notice that it's picking up the part of speech automatically for additional context, and it's picking up other things in the background that we try not to expose everything that's going on at the AI level, just because it gets overwhelming for the user. Let's save this term. Now notice that it's tokenizing in yellow these terms. So now engine is modelo, generativa is added here, and what else? But venha is used as time in the translation memory is used as venha. What's going to happen now here, if I ask AI to translate, in this case, we already have the context match, so the AI isn't going to be very different. Let's see what happens when I ask it to translate. But notice that it changed the context match here. Why? Because
we're trying to different things, but
yeah, and again, but that's what's so crazy about it, right? We're used to, at least I come from a background in translation where a context match is gold, and if you change it, you're basically a linguistic criminal. And and AI is a little bit different about this. It's like, yeah, it's right until I no longer understand that there's a high probability that it's correct. So that's the first concept that's really different for most translators, in my opinion, to work with AI, is that it's not all or nothing. It's in some cases, in most cases that I see, for instance, a context match will be respected. In this case, it's understanding that the semantic departure is large enough so that it should prioritize more the machine translation option. It considers the machine translation option more accurate. Now, accurate and good are often not the same thing in translation, so there are ways to teach it differently. But if we, just to illustrate how the engine works, if we teach it differently, let's teach it a different term. Let's call, let's say we don't want to translate at all generative language engine. So let me delete this term. And let me delete this term too. And let's teach it that generative language engine should not be translated. And let's keep it the same. Okay. So now we taught it that it shouldn't be translated, and let's ask AI to translate it again, see what it does. Now, notice that it's trying to apply, if I apply the translation, it's trying to keep this in English now. Maybe it makes sense, maybe not, but let's change. So, the gist of it, just to make sure that everybody's on board, and please feel free to ask any questions. The gist of it is, it's instead of the translator having to think about, okay, I have the green, I have the blue, I have the yellow, what do I do with it? It's giving what it considers to be a plausible, feasible, linguistically feasible alternative based on all this context. And I'm going to stop to see if that makes sense or if you have any questions.
No, it makes sense, I think.
And again, part of the weirdness is that it's not 100%. Like, for instance, in certain, I've seen lots of cases where I teach the glossary not to translate something. I think I was trying to keep cloud-based in English the other day, but it's really rare, right? In Portuguese, for instance, that you don't translate cloud-based. Cloud moving, super familiar concept for most people in IT in Portuguese. And it wasn't respecting the glossary that I was teaching it. So it's just weird. It's like working, in my opinion. I mean, I know that I don't like to anthropomorphize too much, but it's almost like working with a thing that has its own ideas, whatever it is. So it's not going to always agree, but it's going to offer you different possibilities. So that's the translation bit. Go ahead.
No, I was saying that it's good to have different possibilities because you can play with words and context. If you are in a creative context, it's really good to have different words and possibilities.
Yeah. So now that you go ahead. Mm-hmm.
No, I was just going to compliment Anna's comment because last week I was working with, I was actually evaluating some machine translation results. And I was telling Anna that judging the things that AI gives you is so much easier and so much more comfortable because you can look at it and be like, okay, what about like, what part of this is going to be useful? Like, what can I use? What do I agree with? What don't I agree? And how are we going to use this information that we have? So I think that it can be very useful if you're open to actually looking at what's going on, what's happening.
Especially with statistics and experience, right?
Yeah, and I agree 100%. And plus, I think the key change here is that it's learning, right? It's not, when we confirm something in the translation memory, it's not just being stored in a database. It's more context. And the more context, the more aligned it becomes to a certain style. So notice that I asked, and I think, Anna, you were touching on this alternative suggestion.
And super alternative.
and I clicked on alternative suggestion, and it's suggesting something actually very close to your first feed, with the difference that you use Modelo, but it's introducing the which I agree that like the hora was a super abrupt way of starting a sentence. It's suggesting hora. And it's suggesting also motor de linguagem. So the alternative suggestion, the way we created it, is it doesn't take into account the translation memory and the glossary. It's trying to look at it as if it were a reader. Like, I'm just a reader on the internet when something that sounds okay, and it's explaining why, right? In Portuguese, it's common to use the verb before the noun to indicate this, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to agree with it, but it gives you more alternatives, right? So that's something that I find particularly useful. Not always. I mean, I use this very rarely, but it's nice to have an alternative
I think it's very important to have this explanation because
Mhm.
depending on your level of experience, if you have this explanation, you can change everything or understand better, right? So it's really
Yeah,
important.
and notice that right now it changed. I asked it again. It's a
Yeah.
different suggestion and it's a different explanation. And I agree with you. I learn more from the explanation than from the suggested translation itself. I'm like, yeah, maybe that makes sense to use that here. Maybe it doesn't. And yeah, I think, and this is, I think, a key pillar, right? That I've been so far baffled really with what, like, what's going on with AI. So, in my opinion, AI is a very loose term, right? It means very different things for different people. And then and it used to be basically a research thing, right? Very few people in the open public like talked about AI at all, really, like occasionally here and there. But then ever since GPT 3.5 came out, like this was basically in the mainstream, right? Everybody now knows about AI. Everybody understands the idea of prompt engineering, a large language model. These terms are floating around, right, in the common vocabulary. But when I talk to translators and agencies and buyers, I notice that there's this idea, like the ChatGPT interface is became almost like one with the idea of generative AI. And
Yeah.
and then when I see like translators discussing about AI, they're talking about it as like, oh, is it better or is it worse than machine translation? Is it better? Can it replace me? Can I just paste the text there and ask it to, and ask it to translate? And I think there's fundamentally like such a misunderstanding, in my opinion, over what generative AI is or is not. Because when you see BWX, for instance, everything in the background, it's all machine learning, it's all AI, but the user experience is focused on working with the translator, right? The idea is enhancing the translator experience, giving them more food for thought, allowing them to maybe work less in terms of, like, let's say, upgrading a fuzzy into a good match, and really thinking more about language, right? So in my opinion, it's about allowing a translator or human being to work more productively, with less efforts, and with greater quality. That's kind of like the maybe it's utopian, but that's the idea behind it. But I noticed that for most people, it's kind of like this really scary thing, because it's either me or AI. It's kind of like one or the other. And
Actually, we have to take
go ahead.
advantage of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we still need an expert to proofread to see if it's making sense or etc. So you can just rely on the AI and imagine that's everything correct. So the translator will not be replaced.
Well, I agree, and I think it's even more than that. Like the way we're seeing it, it's like trying to, if a translator is just proofreading, right, and making like little changes here, sure, that's one possibility. But the way I'm seeing it, the translator becomes a model trainer. They're training their own little model, because the model is powered by the context that we teach, right? So it's a very important point that you're touching on. It's like we're not training an instance of GPT. Everything, by the way, you're seeing here is operating with GPT 3.5 and GPT-4, different operations flowing through different engines. But we're not training the instances. We're using we're context to essentially align the responses to what's expected. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it's not like we're training an instance. In the end, what you get as a translator, you get like an individualized engine. It starts to become more and more similar to the way you translate. It's very personal. And then the translator becomes more like a language architect, because their decisions are no longer anymore at the segment level. It's like, if I make this more informal, there's a higher probability that the next feed offered will be informal. If I make it more formal, there's a higher probability that it's going to be more formal. So there's more responsibility with every change, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
And next feature, just to go through them, if I ask it, notice that I made a typo here, if it's picking it up in the regular spell check, but if I just ask AI to proofread it, it just fixed it automatically. Again, can be pretty time saving, not to worry about that, right? And then the other big thing is the semantic verification. So essentially, when I click outside the segment, it's picking up a translation issue, and it's saying the translation is incorrect. The correct translation for time to meet in Portuguese, hora de conhecer or hora de encontrar. So I removed a key verb. It's picking up on the idea that there's a translation issue. And this is what we call semantic verification, right? Typically, when we talk about QA, the QA that I am familiar with, it's this syntactical stuff like tags, breaking spaces, double spaces, mismatches, empty segments, right? The typical syntactical QA stuff. But translation smells is a semantic verifier. So want to make sure that that concept is also clear.
Yeah.
Perfect. Cool. So now let's take a look at this segment over here, the following one. Actually, let's fix it. First, let's fix it. I'm going to ask to translate again, and I'm going to confirm this. Now, if we take a look at this next one, and notice that we called users navegantes, right? Which is weird. And the machine translation used usuários. But let's teach it some more stuff. So, for instance, notice that it didn't translate machine learning. It did translate processamento de linguagem natural, which could be a little bit inconsistent. And notice that the smells is picking up users as navegantes, which means browsers. It should be translated as usuários. So there's stuff going on, right? The translator isn't working on like in their own minds. They're getting inputs from different sources, right? So let's teach it something simple here to see what changes. Right now, it's translating deliver as oferecer. Let's make it more literal. And it's picking up it's a verb. Let's call this. Tell me what you would like to call it. Any synonym.
You want a more literal? Entregar?
I was thinking about that, but you read the. I induced you to think that. So, you could give me any term.
Possibilitar, perhaps.
Okay, cool. I like that one. That's harder for the engine to work with. Very cool. Okay, so now it's picking up on that. Anything else that you'd like to teach it? Any terms?
We are going to change the user. We're going to
let's change the users. No. I know that's like driving you crazy. So let's what do you want to call users?
I would say usuários, but it's the right way.
No, let's call it usuários. No, that's fine. Let's make it right. Let's call it usuários. What else? Do you like the idea of translating natural language processing and keeping machine learning in English? Should we?
I was thinking about machine learning because if you are translating processamento de linguagem natural, you should translate machine learning too, right?
Right. So let's do that. Let's teach it to translate machine learning as, what should we say it is?
Aprendizagem de máquina.
I have no idea what they call it in Portuguese. Is it aprendizagem de máquina? But let's leave it like that.
I think it is.
All right.
Right now.
And what about unparalleled? Right now it's using incomparável. Are you happy with that?
I think I would add like dinâmica e incomparável. I think,
Okay.
I don't know if we can add like a
Oh yeah, we can. But at this point,
linking.
I'm just thinking about first what we want to teach it with term wise, and then let's see
Oh, okay.
how the translation is going to adapt, and then we can fix it. All right, let's see what happens. We added quite a bit of things. Let's
Yeah.
ask it to translate it. Go ahead.
No, I would ask if they could suggest something
Yeah,
more than
I mean, mhm.
incomparável.
Let's do it. Sem igual, incomparável.
Sim, igual. Uhum.
It's picking up. It's an adjective. Now we have that. Now let's ask it to translate it one more time. Now with everything that we taught it. And notice that it's writing in a way that is plausible, right? A vida works, utilizou toda a sua expertise em aprendizagem de máquina e processamento de linguagem natural para a possibilidade de uma experiência de aprendizado dinâmica incomparável para nossos usuários. So this is very different, right, from the first translation that we offered based on everything that we taught it. And we're not just teaching it at this level, and the AI really didn't like our translation. It's picking up all kinds of stuff here, picking up it's inaccurate, and it's saying it's inaccurately, didn't like the idea of leveraged, and didn't like the idea of translating machine learning at all, and didn't like, and it's saying it's wordy. So it really did not like our translation, but the good thing is that it doesn't get a final say. We can still say we love it. We love our translation. So that's the idea behind Translation Smells. It's offering you a second set of eyes, a second opinion. But the idea is the user is always the owner of the decision. And before we go any further, Rodrigo, do we have any questions from you, from our amazing audience? How are we doing?
No questions so far. So far, it's basically, yeah, no question.
Okay, cool. So we'll continue. So, explore o nosso sistema de gestão de tradução. Here we have a 100% match. Notice that the machine translation is really different than what the AI offered. The AI offered something that's similar to the TM, but also notice that the feed is different too, because it's using, this is what I find so cool, right? The feed is using, in the glossary, we taught it that TMS should be plataforma de gestão de tradução. But the TM is saying sistema de gestão de tradução. The AI tried to somehow reconcile both of them, which is really weird, but that's what it's trying to do, right? It's trying to say, okay, you taught me in the glossary that TMS should be translated, but you also taught me in the TM that it should be sistema de gestão de tradução. What do I do with this discrepancy? And it's trying to suggest something plausible. And I can always, as a user, let's say I'm just going to delete this, for instance, and I'm happy with this as an example and be good with it. I can ask it for an alternative, and let's see. Oh, actually, I just asked it to translate it again. Let's ask for an alternative and see what it says. But the key thing is that, and this one is saying also TMS, and yeah, it's a pretty plausible alternative. I would say better than what we have currently, and I can always apply it. But the key thing for us is really understanding that before the TM, the MT, the TB, these were like rigid structures. They were just stored somewhere and referenced. Now they're learning material, and that changes everything. But before we go further, again, when I hear from both of you, Michaela, any questions, any comments, any ideas?
What occurs to me right now is that what you said about this being like a learning machine, because it's going to learn from a bunch of different people. So it's always going to be very unique and very original, even though it's still a system. So I was just thinking about it, like at the end of the day, the translator as the person, it's still very important. It's crucial. So.
Oh yeah. And that, my opinion, and again, maybe I'm wrong, but I've been writing a lot about this. But my opinion is that, like, first, the first hypothesis that I've read with, the greater accuracy brought by large language models is, okay, specialists are still going to be important, right? So if you're a specialist in legal, you're still going to have to read over the legal translation, like you were saying, to proofread and make sure things make sense, right? And I see that use case 100%. But I also see the use case where you're going, which is the linguistic nuances and complexity. They become so much more important because with powered, like, just as an example here, right? Even if I don't speak, let me open this in a different language, just as an example. Like, let's open this, for instance, in Japanese. And based on our data so far, the baseline, even if someone doesn't speak the language at all, if they have a glossary, which in this case I don't have, and some kind of TM, the results that are coming from machine translation from our language model are so much better than machine translation by itself that you're really no longer like working with horrible translations. Like with MT, for instance, it's a hit or miss kind of thing. Like you could have really great translations and really shitty translations like this one, like A Great Fit for Everyone and Watch Marjuche para Todos makes absolutely no sense. So that's the experience with MT, right? And the experience with this is the baseline, the def becomes higher. And as the baseline becomes higher, readers expect more out of a translation because it's no longer like, oh, does it kind of say what the source was saying? It's like, am I enjoying reading this? Is this fun for me to read in Portuguese? Am I engaging with this? So I agree in the sense that I do see the opportunity for even more value in translators, but I also think that the profession is likely to become way more technical in the sense that you have to be able to understand the reasons behind these decisions and where you're taking things. So yeah, I wanted to see what you think about that.
No, yeah, absolutely. I think the future is going to be just us getting used to using these resources, and using resources is a good thing.
Yeah, but I agree 100%. And I think the challenge is what I'm seeing so far in the community in general is I see a lot of people in the worrying / denying phase. A lot of people like, yeah, this is not really happening. It doesn't impact me. But at the same time, I'm really worried that at some point I'm going to become irrelevant. And in my opinion, that's a really unproductive place to be in. And then I see a lot of people, very few people, like what we would call the early adopters or more like tech prone people, tech savvy people. They're like experimenting with LLMs and they're copying and pasting content into LLMs and they're creating maybe some kind of basic integration. But it's surprising because you don't have to be a techie to use BWX, for instance. And yet there's so much, it's not even resistance. There's like a misconception over what AI can be. Like, is this daunting? Is this going to scare me? Is this going to be something good? And it's just the idea of trying it and experimenting with it is can be quite intimidating. And I'm wondering from you, like, and based on your experience and the fact that you're researchers and experts in this, have there been things that you have done in the past that help people feel more at ease with the technology?
From my experience, the first time I used, for example, GPT, I was scared. Like, oh my God, it's going to replace myself. But I think it's a good tool to work with. It's efficient and the productivity is way much better because you have possibilities and different things that you can think. Because when you are translating, maybe you don't have a thesaurus or something that can show you different words in context, and The GPT, for example, can help you a lot. The generative, it's amazing. So it's not replacing us for sure, but it's a good thing to have by your side to work with and to ask for help sometimes. So I think it's really important. And if you think about in the past with other technologies, we were scared too. So
Yeah.
it's more to adapt to this new technology.
Yeah, I would say just give it a try because as Anna said, I was also very scared at the beginning, thinking like, oh my God, what's gonna happen? Now everybody's gonna use this to translate, and then I was at first I was just kind of like, okay, I don't trust this. And then as I was using it and just testing it and seeing what type of output appears, I was kind of like, okay, I can work with it. Like this is a good resource that can help me out when I'm working. So just give it a try. Just
I agree. I mean, that's a very open-minded approach. And
yeah.
and just taking a look at this translation again, a great fit for everyone. Obviously, the translation suggested is horrible. How would you like to translate fit?
Mm. Still thinking how would be better.
I was thinking about perhaps match, which is another English word, but I've seen it being used in Portuguese.
Okay.
Like they'll
Yeah,
match. Yeah.
yeah, I like that. Very informal. Let's see what it does. I'm curious. Let's see what it does.
This is interesting.
Oh, that was a great suggestion. Check it out. Like it tried to use match, but did not agree with keeping it in English and suggested combinação. But go ahead.
If you are translating from English into Portuguese, they accept English words in the middle because we already saw this. They didn't accept.
That's the thing. It's probabilistic. So there's no rule that says that it cannot accept. But in certain cases, it will accept. In other cases, it will not. Basically, based on what GPT understands that the Portuguese lexicon consists of, if it's prevalent enough, it'll tend to accept, and if it's not prevalent at all, it'll tend to reject. We can always override it, say like, hey, you have to accept the glossary with English no matter what. You're going to get some weirdness, but it's possible like to adjust it as necessary. And let's just
go ahead. We are using some English words in the middle, so we not translate everything depending the context, but it's very interesting the situation.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Let's change fits to combinação. Let's teach it something different. Like I want to teach. I like the idea of matching. Maybe the idea of encaixe, but I don't know. Something around that. Let's see. Let's call it solução to see what it does. And translate. And now it's using solução. And notice that too, that it's a detail, right? But before it was using now it's using uma. So it's flexing the sentence as necessary to make sense of what we're trying to teach it. It's not just like, oh, this is the term, I'll just inject it in the right place, right? It's rewording as necessary. And that changes things very significantly, right? You're no longer just you're no longer having to resolve these things in such a granular way, right? You can look at the sentence and be like, okay, there's no more fuzzy match. Let me just read this and see how it sounds to me. Like this is a good example. In this sentence, I think both the machine translation and the AI got it pretty good. And we can ask it for an alternative suggestion. Let's see what it suggests. And again, the alternative suggestion will typically provide an alternative suggestion, even though the translation is okay. It's not going to say, I'm not going to provide you with a suggestion. It's going to provide you with something to think about.
Yeah.
And in this case, the alternative suggestion is, what is it changing? The term glossarius. Permitem. It's translating exactly the same and just explaining the rationale for why the translation is okay. Let's see over here. See, remember, we taught it in the previous segment that users should be usuários. Now it's getting it right. Now it's no longer teaching it that it's navegantes, for instance. Providencie, for instance, it's we can change this. It's kind of weird. What would you like to change here?
Yeah, we could say forneça instead of providencie.
What else?
Arrasador is a little weird.
Yeah, but notice how cool, right? Check out the machine translation. The machine translation was forneça, which is what we just taught it.
Yeah.
Aos usuários, ambiente de produtividade aprimorada. Is a lot more formal, right?
Yeah.
Notice that the AI is using providencia aos usuários ambiente de produtividade superior e arrasador. Even though it's like way over the top, it's picking up. We've been teaching it a little bit more informal things, and it was, like I said, it's tending more towards the informality. And again, it's picking up. This is what I find it so cool, right? We're trying to emulate how a person is. At least maybe I'm just completely schizo, but when I'm translating, I'm like, is this right? Is this not right? Could I do it this way? Could I do it that way? Could I, and I have doubts and internal conflict. And we're trying to create that in the engine experience as well. So if I take a look at it, it's not just, if we take a look at the smells, it's not agreeing with its own translation, right? It's saying the translation of ripping enhanced productivity is inaccurate. The word ripping does not have a direct translation in this context, and the arrasador does not convey the intended meaning. More accurate translation would be ambiente de produtividade aprimorada. So it's going more along the formal lines of the MT. And to me, that's what language is all about, right? It's about, okay, is it this way? Is it that way? Could it be better like this? Could it not? And the idea is that the translator is fed with more context so that they can make more informed decisions, if that makes sense.
Totally, because sometimes we are always complaining that we don't have too much context to translate. So This is awesome.
Yeah, and one of the things, that we're just opening this door to context. That's the key thing. Whether it's learning from other, right now, like the translator, the only context that they used to have was a TM, right? And if they wanted to have more context, they would have to search for a word in the TM and see where it's happening and see, okay, this context makes sense. The AI is doing all of this in the background. It's looking for this context. It's looking to provide something, and you're getting further context because you're getting information coming from different vantage points. So I think one of the key concepts here is that you no longer, at least in theory, you no longer need, actually we're able to show it in practice, but typically, like, we're used to saying, you need someone to translate and someone to review it, preferably even a third person to proofread it to get full translation quality. And what we see here is that a single user in a single workflow is able to, provided that they are capable and aware of their decisions and are making good decisions, they're capable of delivering the same level of translation that would have previously required 3 different workflow steps. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah. So let's see here. This is interesting. So we taught it again. So I had taught it previously. Everything, todas as coisas, super informal. let I'll let you pick a segment or anything that catches your eyes that you would like to change and see how the AI factors.
Let me ask you something, Gabriel.
Yes,
Here we
I love
have
questions.
small sentences, but in a text, how long the AI could translate it, depending, because you have segmentation here, right?
Mhm.
So segment is like a paragraph. Would it work too, or no?
Yeah, totally. You can change here in BWX in an organizational unit. You can change the segmentation rules by adding an SRX file and have it segment, for instance, by paragraph. It would work the same. The response time will be a little longer. Like, for instance, if you delete
Yeah.
this and ask it to, this is a longer sentence, for instance, if I ask it to translate it, it'll take maybe 1 or 2 more seconds than a short segment. Like if I go here,
Yes.
like the segment is much faster, just because there's more computational power being used.
Of course. Interesting.
Yeah, this is a good example. I found a fuzzy. Great. I was looking for one. So, like, for instance, here you see one tech to rule them all. We had 100% match that used uma única tecnologia para dominar todas elas. Another 62% match that was talking about controlar. The machine translation is using governar, but the glossary said comandar. So it infused the 100% match with the glossary to provide uma única tecnologia para comandar todas elas. And it did not like its own suggestion. It's saying one tech to rule them all is a reference to the phrase one ring to rule them all from Lord of the Rings. The correct translation should be uma única, talking about context, right? It's like, this is where the phrase is coming from. It's like awesome. To me, that's awesome, right? It's like, how often do I translate things and I have no idea where it's coming from, and I end up mistranslating it because I didn't know the bigger context. I mean, there's a limit, right, to how much cultural information we're all exposed to. And it's saying the correct translation should be uma única tecnologia para governá-las todas. And it's different from the machine translation. It's different from anything in the TM. And I can agree with it or disagree with it. But I'm to be honest, like, I'm blown away because I use smells all the time, and what I love about it is it's not predictable. It's not like this kind of thing where it's like, oh, you have too many characters, or this spelling mistakes. It's like things that are deterministic, right? It's I mean, I've seen smells pick up on gender bias. It picks up on awkwardness, wordiness, things that don't make sense, mistranslations, omissions, but it's not jammed into a certain thing. It's trying to, I mean, this is a comment that is very human like, right? It's like, hey dude, this is coming from Lord of the Rings. So I'm surprised by the level of, I think you use the right word, like the level of context that it brings to the table.
Yeah.
And Gabriel, we have
Yes.
a couple of questions here. We have one coming from Wendy, and I think probably you will cover the website translation further ahead.
Oh, we are translating a website right now.
Okay.
So
yeah,
that is but the focus is around AI. But we can have a further one, like more technical on the ways to translate a website. But we have a lot of blog articles around that, so I highly recommend visiting our blog. Rodrigo, maybe you can type the link in our chat to some of the articles we have around best practices and how to translate a website. I think that could be super useful. We have lots of guides around that. And again, just about the website, we try to be very agnostic as far as the tech employed to export content from a website. Really, with BWX, you could have a JSON file, a YAML file, XLIF file, XML file, a doc file, really anything that you need. The important thing that we're trying to show is, you can preview what the content is looking like, which is something very important for websites. And this technology works for any given website as long as there are no blockers to our preview. Some websites have additional security layers that will prevent the preview from working. And even in those cases, we do have what we call an experimental workflow that will create a snapshot. It will basically transform a website into a JPEG so that we can render websites with additional layers of security. And it takes a little bit longer to render, but here it is. This is a JPEG of our site. And then the AI component really is how much faster you can be. And then when we talk about the website, right, everything that we're seeing here in yellow, this also has SEO relevance. So the glossary decisions are more important than ever in a website. Right? You're the SEO expert here, Rodrigo. I think you know much better than we do that whatever we define in the glossary is key, and the productivity is very important too, because websites have a ton of content. They get updated so often, and we really need them to be translated very, very effectively. So yeah, I think that's how I would correlate it. Everything that we've been showing to a website, it's like I said, it's a little bit more abstract than a how to translate a website, but it does touch on all the mechanics after and before the import and the export.
Great. We have another question coming from Pedro. Is there a
Mhm.
limit to the number of words for AI?
So every
For
user
AI translate,
every user, let's just cover this very briefly. Every user in BWX in the personal plan costs $9 a month, and they have access to 100,000 processed words. If you need more words, and 100,000 is quite a bit of words, but if you need more words, you can basically pay for more users, and you'll get more words in your account. That's the limit, let's say.
Great. Another one, it's coming from Doni. Do import and export functions work well with other catch tools?
Yeah, this is another thing that's important to cover. So when you support article, so most cat tools export in either one of these XLIF flavors: XLIF, XLIF, XLIF2, SDL, XLIF, and you can perfectly import them into BWX, and that's something important to keep in mind. When you're done with a project, you can always export here. Let me open here in. So you can always import and export both the XLIF file, and you can select the workflows that you'd like, and you can export everything at once, just the XLIF file, a lock kit, which includes the glossary as well, just the translated files, and so on. So you can always go from one to the other fairly simply. I do want to point out that typically you do have tagging variation, and if you do work with different systems, you need to pay a lot of attention to tagging structure. One cool thing is that we didn't touch on, but I do want to show you, is, let me find here this very simple segment. So I don't know how this is going to work, but notice that the AI
I think I
removed the
know what
tags.
you. Yeah, there is one a question here, Mohammed. I saw a feature
Mhm.
only caring about automatic tag fixing
Yeah,
or something like that in this tool. Could you provide more details? I'm interested.
yeah. So let's ask AI to translate here, and let's apply the translation. Notice that the AI doesn't have any of the tags in the translation. For some reason, it didn't consider them relevant. The machine translation does. But if I ask tag fixing, for some reason it's not rendering the second one correctly, but the tag is there. So it introduced the tags at exactly the right place for Chinese as well. So actually this is, simplified Chinese, but I have better examples for tag fixing as well. Let me see if I can pull them up. Let me see if I can find a good example. Any other questions, Rodrigo, while I pull this up?
No, we are here with Bridget. She did a couple of comments, but no question. Pedro, Wendy, Donny, thank you everyone for coming today. But questions, yeah, this is the last question.
Perfect. Okay, so let me take a look here. And yeah. I'm going to see if I can find a let's see if I can find a XML something tags, but I don't have anything in mind right now. Let me see. No, we're almost at time. But Mohammed, I do recommend you checking it out. The tag fixing thing is something relatively new. It's really cool, especially in situations where you have these. Let me see if I can find here a project. When you have when you're working with an HTML or something like that, working with things that have a lot of tagging, it can save a ton of time not having to manually fix all of the tags. And again, let me see if I find anything here. I didn't come with any really great examples for that. But again, let me point it out in Portuguese. Same kind of idea here. So in this case, we're also missing the tags. Let's fix the tags. And this is a really hard example too, because the tags are right between the its, and it's trying to add the tags, and it's not looking good. But in most cases, the tag fixing works really, really well. But I'm going to stop sharing. I think I've shared enough of the screen. I want to ask Micaela and then Luisa what you think of everything that we've been talking about, if it's been good, bad.
I think it's amazing because we have different explanations, different context to think about and to consider while translating. And sometimes you don't have this when you are translating with other tool. So it's really impressive, actually.
Yeah,
Thank
I'm
you.
also very impressed. I was also thinking of how useful it would be if people who are being trained had access to some of these tools for training. It's amazing, especially with whenever you are trying to translate from a language of, let's say, Chinese, in which the culture is very, very different. I was thinking about the Lord of the Rings example. It would be very useful because sometimes there are other productions, books, poems, whatever, which are very important to some cultures. And then if you can pick it up, if you can understand it as you are beginning in the job of translating, I think that's very interesting, very useful.
I agree. We have a partnership with the Middlebury Institute and of International Studies in Monterey, and their students use BWX as part of their training. I think it's super interesting and helpful. I agree.
Oh, that's
yeah, it's pretty
good
cool,
for
and I
them.
think that it's interesting too. Like when the more open-minded you can be about it, the better. So
Yeah.
100%.
Definitely.
All right. Well, I really thank you so much, both of you, for your time, for all your insights, your great questions. I felt honored, privileged to be here with both of you. Really hope that this is the first of many times that we get together. And yeah, and thank you, Rodrigo, so much for making this happen and for making this online event become a possibility.
Thank you for the invitation, both of you. It's
Yeah.
amazing to be here. It's a pleasure, and hope to get in touch soon.
All right.
Yes.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.